Welcome everyone to the 12th Annual Cleveland Economic Summit. We're excited to have everyone attend our event. This is not a recorded event. I am live and so will our speakers. This is a new format for Planned Financial Services. We wanted to honor our continuing commitment for our Economic Summit. And while we missed being at the Botanical Gardens, we are excited to be here with everyone, kind of share our thoughts of what's going on in the world, as well as the couple guest speakers that we have that I'll introduce shortly. Again, this is a new venue. One of the things I will remind everyone is after each of the speakers finish their talk, at the bottom of the screen, you'll have the ability to raise your hand for the Q&A section. So I wanted to make sure everyone was aware. I know this is kind of a new function for everyone, so I wanted to make sure everyone was very comfortable. I also want to thank our sponsors, as they are an important resource for additional research and financial insights to the firm. So I want to give thanks to New York Life Investments, MFS Investments, ClearBridge Investments. They have sponsor booths, so anyone who wants to say hello and drop in and ask a few questions, please feel free to do so. We are excited today because we have two great speakers who I'll introduce formally later. Cleveland's own Bob DiBiasio, Senior Vice President of Public Affairs of the Cleveland Indians, and Jacob Drossner, Portfolio Specialist for ClearBridge Investments. I want to start, and I want to thank Big Bang Theory. It's a big, fun show that we watch at our home, but one of the Newton's third law states that for every reaction, there's an opposite and equal reaction. Let's face it, the start to the 2020 decade had a great short start in January, and then COVID hit in February and hit the world very, very hard. And without second guessing, which is easy for our fear-minded media, we all went into basically a massive shutdown, not only enclosure-wise within our own homes, but economies worldwide were really shut off. And what we do remember is in March, financially, the markets dropped 33%. It was the fastest drop in market history, but equally impressive was the recession and recovery was the shortest and fastest. So I think what that tells us is not only the strength in the economy, not only in the U.S. but worldwide, but we have to believe in the capitalism that supports everything that we do in our lives in our world. So without a strong economy, a lot of things just really don't happen. And I think what's made this really much harder for all of us, because we've been through financial downturns before. About 10 years ago, we had the Great Recession. In 2001, we had the tech bubble bust. Those were all, financially troublesome and impacted people and impacted businesses. I think what's made this very difficult for us, though, is it impacted the way we live. We're a free nation. We're used to going about where we want to go, what we want to do, and not being told we can't do anything. And I think that's been a really big challenge for all of us. As I think we see things coming out, when we're told we're not allowed to be with family and friends, visit loved ones in the hospital, it was tough. Myself, I had my father was in the hospital for a period of time, and there's a period of time we weren't allowed to go visit him, and it put a lot of stress. And I can't imagine, there's other families that had to experience the same thing. But from those dark days of March through May, we've adjusted and we've emerged, and having adjusted well, given the COVID time. In fact, which was really odd, consumer spending is up year over year. Consumer spending has been positive in 5 months straight, which is very indicative of the direction and the financial strength of the economy. So these are things that we should be looking to feel good about. Unfortunately, we're again besieged by negative stories in the media. And if you don't see a theme here, I'm not a big media fan. But the negative stories about the election, which are keeping us on edge, and until the election is over, and that'll be a thank God for all of us, regardless of who wins. But the thing is, this has happened 58 times in our history, and every election becomes negative. I think what's different today is the 24/7 access to media. As human beings, we're just hearing it all the time. So my best advice to people is, turn it off, vote for who you want to vote for, and then maybe turn on the news channel after the election. But what's interesting is the markets, really, they seek clarity. If history shows us anything, they don't really care so much as who's in the Oval Office. They really want clarity and direction so that, as individuals, as companies, we can plan. So really, market performance has really been the same regardless if a Democrat or Republican has really held office. What really matters and what we look for at our firm is what is the health and the direction of the economy. And right now, it's positive. It doesn't mean it can't change, but right now it's positive, and you're seeing that reflected in the S&P 500. You're seeing that reflected in the Dow Jones. And these are things that I think are very, very good for us. We just started the 2020 decade. And, it reminds me, I was born in the early 60s, and the 60s was really a tumultuous decade. If you think about it, when you look at the negative news, there was the Vietnam War. We had 3 major assassinations. You had the Bay of Pigs. You had the Cuban Missile Crisis. And you say, well, geez, hopefully the next 10 years we don't have something equivalent to all of that. But a lot of things happened that were good. There was a Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act that got put in place. Thurgood Marshall was the first black Supreme Court justice. We had the Apollo missions. We had the pacemaker developed. We had fiber optics. Now I'm really dating myself. We had portable calculators and the tape cassette, but the internet started. So when we look today and where we're at, and we look at what's positive and going on, even today, the Wall Street Journal announced that the USA and Russia were close to agreeing on limiting nuclear arms. Recently, we had another Middle East treaty. You see in technology, trends in artificial intelligence, expansion of the affordable 5G data network, autonomous driving, which started a few years back, but I think will become more realistic and put in use as we see it in our country. Blockchain technology. I think the other thing that we've learned, especially early on, is we've learned, given COVID, finding different ways to do business. Even within our own firm, one of the things that we were worried about is being able to connect with our own clients. And like many other businesses, we've used technology, and Zoom has been our preference currently, to connect with our clients who don't want to meet, at least physically. And we've been able to continue to service and take care of our clients. And I know other businesses are doing the same. So I think that what it tells us about ourselves and the U.S. economy, and really the world economy in general, is that when you put an obstacle in front of us, we're going to try to find a way to get around it. We're going to try to find a way to move forward. And even with the limitations that we've had as a society, in regards to ability to go to a restaurant, enjoy a Cleveland Indians baseball game, go to a football game, those things have been, a challenge. However, what we've found and what we've learned from our clients and talking with other people is we found different ways to connect. Families are spending more family time together. People are getting more outdoors. We're finding different ways to connect, family Zoom meetings or Skype meetings. So there are things that I think when we look back, and it's hard to see right now because we're still in the eye of the storm, I think when we have a chance to look back with an objective lens, we're going to see how we have from a positive standpoint, reacted to the COVID virus and the COVID threat, and we'll overcome it. I mean, at the end of the day, a vaccine will happen. It's in the works, and we all know that, and it's going to happen, I think, relatively soon. So I want individuals to really take heed that I feel that, I'm an optimist by nature, but I try to look for the good that's happening when you see signs of trouble, because that's where there's opportunity. And I think it's important for people to have the right kind of lens and not to be what I call a Debbie Downer, because that's easy to do. And again, it's easy when you're hit with so much negative in the media, it makes it tough. So I do want to leave you, if you like reading, I want to leave you with a good source. On the way back from Germany, I was visiting my daughter last fall when she was studying abroad in Germany, in Stuttgart, and I just picked up a book at the airport, and it was 10 reasons. It's a book's called Factfulness, and it's 10 reasons why we're wrong about the world and why. It's written by Hans Rosling, and it's an objective research book that really, and it's not dry, I will tell you that. It's actually very interesting. It really tells you how to look at the world and tells you how to look at numbers and how to interpret things to see that while we still as a society, as a world, still have to continue to improve. When you look back 20 years, you look back 40 years, you look back 60 years, we've come a long way, and we'll continue to improve as a country and as a nation and as a world. And I think if you read that book, I felt, after I read it, I felt much more relief. Even as though, like I said, I'm an optimist, it really put me in a position to understand the world better. And what it starts with, and I don't want to spoil the book, but it does start with, I think, 12 or 13 questions. It asks you about your knowledge of the world, and it tests you. And the reality is most people get most of the answers wrong. And when you read the book, I think it'll give you a clarity about things that you might not we as individuals might misunderstand. And part of it's the media. Part of it is most of the time, when you look at where we learned our broad-based knowledge, we were in high school and college. And so those biases really influence how we look at the world every day. So it's a very good read, and I would strongly suggest, it's only a couple hundred pages. You'll really enjoy it, and any feedback I would really appreciate it. So with that, I'm going to conclude my remarks. Again, I'm very upbeat about where we are as a society. I know we still haven't licked COVID yet, but we're getting close, and I think things are trending in the right way. With that, I want to introduce our first guest speaker, Bob DiBiasio, Senior Vice President of Public Affairs for the Cleveland Indians. This year marks his 41st season with the team and his 42nd season in Major League Baseball. Bob joined the Tribe in 1979. He also hosts the popular Indians Alumni Roundtable show on STO and Tribe Tales on the Indians Radio Network. Bob also serves as the president of the Cleveland Indians Charities. He's an honorary member of the Executive Board of Boys and Girls Clubs of Cleveland. He serves on the Athletic Advisory Board at Notre Dame College in Ohio, is a member of the Board of Directors of the Cuyahoga County Public Library Foundation. Let's vote for the levy. That's a good thing for Northeastern Ohio. And the Bob Feller Act of Valor Foundation and the Baseball Heritage Museum at Leap Park. Please join me in welcoming Bob DiBiasio.
Hello. Thank you, Frank. Hello, everybody. And yes, appreciate you giving a shout out to the public library levy. That's number levy 70. A positive vote for that would be truly appreciative. The incredible work that they do in our communities is remarkable. So, thank you for that, Frank. Again, good afternoon, everyone. We'll talk Tribe here for a little bit. Hope you have some questions for us as we get rolling along. May I ask the hosts to throw up the slide show that we have? Yeah, we can go to the second slide. I'm just going to touch on a couple things real briefly. This is obviously a hot topic of discussion these days. Wanted to share with you a little bit of backstory, a little history of our team names. Professional baseball in Cleveland is one of our city's oldest institutions. 2020 was the 120th season as a charter member of the American League, which was established back in 1901. But baseball in Cleveland actually began in 1869. We were named the Forest Cities. We've played in almost every league that was ever established in the history of professional baseball. Think about that, 1869. That's just a few years after the end of the Civil War. And we're playing baseball on the shores of Lake Erie. We then are named the Spiders. So there's a few media. Anthony Castrovents of MLB.com is a huge proponent of possible new name for the Tribe being the Spiders. He's relentless in that approach on Twitter. 1900, we're named the Blues. So in 1901, when the American League was established, our first season, we were named the Blues. Story goes, the players weren't sure that was a manly enough name, and they switched to Broncos in 1902. As you can see here, nicknames really didn't mean a whole lot in the infancy of baseball. because in 1903 we changed our name to the Naps in honor of Napoleon Lajoie. The Cleveland franchise purchased as a free agent the contract of Napoleon Lajoie from Philadelphia, the National League, and the upstart American League wanted to truly promote the fact that one of the great stars of the National League was coming to the American League in the city of Cleveland. So they wanted to promote it at the highest level and name their team after the nickname after Napoleon Lajoie. And that stood until 1914 when Napoleon Lajoie retired and it was time to grab a new name. And there's a whole lot of history involved with the naming of the team Indians. Is it connected to Louis Francis Sockalexis, who played back for the Spiders, the first full-blooded Native American to play professional baseball, which back then was as barrier-breaking as Jackie Robinson and Larry Doby and Frank Robinson in our history. That a Native American was on the same ball diamond back in the late 1800s with white ball players. The Boston Braves had just won the World Series, so some people think that the connection of the good fortune of the Boston Braves played into the name change as well. However you want to visit the history of name changes, the name Indians has stuck. So here we are today with a brand that is over 100 years old as we walk through the best path forward for our franchise. So I knew I'd get this question, so I thought I would just dive into it right away and answer what we know about the name Indians and the process that we are currently going through. And that process includes us just listening and learning. That's what we're doing right now. We're still in constant contact with community leaders, our fans. I think we put a survey out to almost 9,000 fans. We're listening to Native American groups, of course. So we're still involved in the listening and learning stage of this process. So there's no real update to share than what has been out there in the media. Paul Hoynes wrote in Sunday's column, as he does periodically, suggestions from people who think what our new name should be. So yeah, it's a topic of conversation, but wanted to just tell people we're at the same place we've been, which is a very important aspect of any of our businesses, is listening and learning. It's so very important to keep those eyes and ears open, and that's the process we're involved in at the moment. Next slide, please. Real quickly, just wanted to touch again, we go back to being one of the oldest institutions in the city of Cleveland's history and have played in 3 ballparks, League Park, up in the right-hand corner, the Baseball Heritage Museum. Frank mentioned I'm on the board there. It's a phenomenal spot if you're a baseball fan or even just a fan of Cleveland's history. Stop by the Baseball Heritage Museum at League Park. The one thing about League Park you all need to know, it is the only remaining old-time ballpark that still is in existence today and has baseball played on its field. Together, the Cleveland Indians with our youth baseball, amateur baseball programs, together with the city of Cleveland, we really conduct a ton of baseball leagues and clinics, especially clinics for the kids in the neighborhood to get on that field. So those of you who understand baseball history, Ebbets Field, Polo Grounds, Sportsman's Park, Forbes Field, etc., all across east of the Mississippi, where all the old ballparks were located. This is the only one. It's in the city of Cleveland, and it's the only one still standing and utilized to this day. Obviously, Cleveland Stadium built 1932. We didn't move in there till 1947, partly the 46 season. When Bill Veeck bought the team, the focus even before Bill Veeck was we played during the week at the smaller venue of League Park. And then when Saturdays and Sundays hit, they would play especially Sunday doubleheaders. Bob Feller would always pitch the first game of a Sunday doubleheader to get 80,000 people in the ballpark. And then Early Wynn or one of the other greats would pitch game 2 so they could get the 70 to 80,000 crowds. And then as League Park got old, we moved into Cleveland Stadium. And then in 94, obviously, we've moved into, which is one of the jewels, not only of this city, but of the baseball parks all around the country. Just a remarkable, entertaining, comfortable, intimate, urban ballpark. One of the first that was created. Chicago, Baltimore, Texas, and Cleveland were the first 4. Texas already has a new one, which is pretty bizarre, with a roof on it. If we could ever go back, maybe putting a retractable dome on our place, but the money just wasn't there, as the public referendum only won 58 to 42. Or 52 to 48, I should say, 52 to 48. So a slim margin, and all the things that we've been able to do to create energy and enthusiasm and economic impact in the southern edge of downtown. Really a remarkable move on everyone's part. Dick Jacobs playing a key role in that, is maybe the most significant owner in franchise history, only because he was able to get this building built. I think this building is the most significant element in our long, rich history. Without this ballpark being built, we are not in the city of Cleveland. I firmly believe that. I'll share a couple stories on that one. Fay Vincent, commissioner of baseball, sitting in a golf cart at Cleveland Stadium right before May. He was in April, and it was right before the May referendum in 1989, and he's sitting in a golf cart telling our media just that. There's no guarantee that if this fails, that the city of Cleveland would be able to continue to play host to Major League Baseball. On the night of the referendum, in my house, for those of you who are older on this phone call and remember telecopier machines, not email, not cell phone, telecopier machines. The Tampa Tribune and the Denver Post paid for phone lines into my house. I had 2 news releases written, one that the levy passed, and the second that it failed. And they wanted to know immediately, because if it had failed, both cities, Denver and Tampa, thought they were getting the Cleveland Indians. And thankfully, we're able to send the release that it passed, and all the good things that have happened since 1994 inside that building, all the incredible seasons we've had, and all-star games and championships. Well worth the investment that people of Cleveland had made on the southern edge of downtown. Next slide, please. Here's one that I just like to show to give you a real sense of who we are and how long we've been around. We've had 1,912 players, different players wear a Cleveland baseball uniform. There's 34 have been enshrined in Cooperstown. We've played over 18,000 games. You see the divisional titles, the pennants. We need that World Series number to get larger. We've hit 13,000 plus homers. Our winning percentage from 1901 to date, we're a winning baseball franchise with a .512 winning percentage. Batting average at .265. We have a team ERA of 3.83. I just like give, whenever I do one of these, it's fun just to give the total, give you a real sense of the scope of who we are, what we're all about. The fabric of this city is woven through Cleveland Indians baseball, again, dating back to 1869. But these numbers are from the first year of existence in the American League. Next slide, please. Wanted to touch, because of the economic summit, just to touch on a couple things. So if you could take just a second and look at this graph. This is an economic impact study. We reached out to Dr. Lindell over at the, she's the director of the Center for Economic Development at the Levin College of Urban Affairs at CSU, and an expert in economic impact studies. And over the past year, we reached out to her and her group to do a major scrubbing of the economic impact of our baseball franchise on the Northeast Ohio region. This graph, just as it says, 5-year period of 2014 to 18. Annual employment during that time, over 3,000 people. The earnings, not quite $1 billion. Value added, that means obviously all the product and services that are associated with the Cleveland Indians when we bring in food, beverage, all the other things that it takes to put on 81 home games and hopefully more in October. The extended value added to the region is over a 5-year period just at $1.2 billion. Output $1.8 billion. We've paid about 192 total million in taxes. That number includes local, state, and federal tax dollars. So wanted to give you a quick snapshot of not only the fact that we believe we're part of the communal spirit, of course, of Cleveland. Nothing can rally a town like professional sports. We believe we can rally people more than anyone, since we play every day and we play in the summertime, and people are out and about walking downtown and through our neighborhoods and connecting to Cleveland Indians baseball, and the importance and impact of who we are and what we are. And this slide gives you a little bit better sense of that. Next slide, please. Yeah, let's touch on 2020. Just want to talk about 2020. Such a bizarre scenario. I'll start with, before we dive into the season highlights, one of the burning questions I've been receiving for the last month or so was how come no fans were allowed at Progressive Field? There's people watching games at Browns football games, but there were no fans allowed in the ballpark. Just so you have an understanding, while we were going through what they called summer camp or spring training 2 to get ready for a 60-game schedule, which, by the way, most people thought we would never achieve, and we achieved it in grand fashion, I'd have to admit. We played all 60 games. Our guys were adhering to the protocols for and able to play every game that was on our schedule, and most every team in baseball did the same. And here we are at the World Series. I think what Rob Manfred and the commissioner of baseball, Rob Manfred, and his staff did a remarkable job working with each of the teams to be able to get to this point. The protocols that were in place, it started with like a 56-page document that each team had to adhere to. So while we're going through this spring training too, we received this 56, 60-page document on protocols, how we are going to create a safe and healthy environment for our players and staff that are going to put on these baseball games. Every team was able to obviously dive into that document and make comment. That 50, 60-page document turned into a 110-page protocol document that all of us needed to adhere to these protocols if we thought we were going to be able to get through a unique 60-game season during a pandemic. In Cleveland, because the locker rooms and the restrictions, governmental restriction as to how many people could be inside an enclosed environment, such as a locker room, a clubhouse, a player's lounge, a workout, strength and conditioning facility, we utilized our ballpark. Picture Progressive Field, the corner bar. Boy, did we miss hanging out at the corner bar on these beautiful nights. I'll tell you, our summer was so wonderful weather-wise. Every night, my wife and I'd sit there and go, we'd be at the ballpark enjoying a beautiful night at Progressive Field watching the Tribe play. And we were just saddened that we unfortunately missed all that. But think of the corner bar. That's where the visiting team hung out. Inside the corner bar was their player lounge where we fed them. We couldn't do it indoors in the normal facility. Outside of the corner bar, in front of it and behind it, was an outdoor strength and conditioning system set up with yoga mats and free weights and ellipticals and bicycles and all the things, the rubber bands, all the things the guys need. We had that all spread out in the right field corner in the main concourse. The Cleveland Indians used the Lexus Home Plate Club. And in front of it and behind it for our outdoor strength and conditioning area. So our guys were in the ballpark utilizing, we had to use the ballpark itself as facilities for the health and safety protocols for our players. The Discount Drug Mart Club was used for meetings and other things, so we couldn't infuse fans. You know, how do you infuse fans into that scenario? It just didn't make sense for us, especially when it all got going in mid-September. So hope that answers any of your thoughts on the idea that, we just didn't want fans in our ballpark, or whatever your thought process was. Obviously, we would have loved to bring any kind of number of fans inside our facility. But just, we had to be smart. We had to be efficient. We had to be certainly focused on the health and safety of everybody in uniform and those people who put on the game, from the scoreboard crew, the grounds crew, etc. It just made sense for us to do that. We get through 60-game schedule. We have another winning season, 35-25. It's our 8th straight winning season under the tutelage of Terry Francona, and also lucky that we have a Sandy Alomar, the kind of leader Sandy Alomar is, to be able to take over as Tito suffered some health issues throughout this pandemic, and just throwing him into that scenario with his gastrointestinal issues and his blood clot surgeries. It didn't make any sense to throw him into this scenario, being at such a high risk. And so again, we're so very fortunate that Sandy Alomar was there to be our leader. He's a remarkable guy. 4th playoff appearance in the past 5 seasons. It's our 5th in the past 8. We had some incredible individual efforts this year. Shane Bieber, easily, he already won Baseball Digest and Sporting News Pitcher of the Year. He's certainly the top Cy Young Award candidate. He won the pitching Triple Crown. For those of you who may not know that, it's the most wins, lowest ERA, and most strikeouts. The last person to do that in a Cleveland Indians uniform was 1940, the great Bob Feller, who is up over here, him and Joe DiBiasio. This is my home office. One of my cherished autographed items is a black and white photo of a young Bob Feller hanging out with Joe DiBiasio. Mr. Feller gave that to me as a gift. I cherish that picture. But since 1940, Bob Feller won the pitching Triple Crown, and so did Shane Bieber, who has emerged as one of the top pitchers in the game of baseball today. Jose Ramirez is a finalist in the MVP voting once again. He had a big league best 45 runs scored. You can see the stats, 17 homers. James Karinchak is involved and is a finalist in Rookie of the Year. One of the top young bullpen guys in all of baseball, one of our own draft pick kid. He's going to be good. We have something really fun to watch him grow and develop with that incredible curveball and his 98-mile-an-hour fastball. Brad Hand is a finalist for reliever of the year. He led the league, major leagues, in saves with 16. Finishing games, he finished, I think, 21. Brad was 16 for 16 in save situations. Some really incredible individual highlights for our 2020 season. What's the next slide? Before we get into talking about what 2021 will be, it's just interesting how the 2020 season ended. I mean, just so frustrating. You know, you lose 2 games to the Yankees in the best 2 out of 3 wild card series, the expanded playoffs, and the way that game unfolded, the game 2, so that we could have got it to a rubber match game. It was a 10-9 loss to the Yankees, 19 runs scored. There were 18 hits, 12 pitchers used, 7 by us. We jump on Tanaka, the Yankee starter, who has just kicked our butt in the postseason, and most people he beat up on in the postseason. He was a terrific postseason pitcher. We jump on him for 6 runs and a bunch early, and then things just unravel oddly. As I mentioned, James Karinchak, one of the top rookies in all of baseball, had only given up 1 home run all year, and he gives up a grand slam. And Brad Hand, again, 16 for 16 in save situations. Perfect. Leads the league and ends up having his first miscue be in game 2 of that wild card series. And then in the fog of all of that COVID, all of that crazy game takes place and ends up becoming the longest game, 9-inning game, the longest 9-inning game in the history of Major League Baseball. In the history of baseball, 4 hours and 50 minutes. You talk about frustrating. Us Tribe fans, we know that word, unfortunately, but we've also had some incredible, wonderful times rooting for this team over the past close to 30 years. And certainly in the last 20 some years with the Dolan ownership, who are now the longest tenured owners in franchise history. How are we going to position ourselves in the most challenging offseason in the history of baseball? That's where we are confident. Chris Antonetti, who is our president of baseball operations, Mike Chernoff, our general manager, Carter Hawkins, assistant GM, and their group knows how to put together a baseball team. And the way we can go about doing our business, A, think about it, as all you are doing budgets, we're in the midst of our business planning and budget process, and we don't know if we're going to have fans next year. We don't know if we're going to have our ticket revenue and our concessions revenue, which commands about 45% of our total income. As an industry, we lost billions of dollars. As a franchise, we lost tens of millions of dollars. And I can keep going on the tens. So devastating. How do you recover? It's through efficiency. It's through being smart. It's through teamwork, the things that have gotten us this far to have 8 straight winning seasons. And we feel good that once we do get back to spring training, Arizona Fall League, or not the Fall League, but there's activities going on at our state-of-the-art complex in Goodyear right now with a ton of our athletes. As we hopefully are able to get a spring training going, we have Terry Francona back as the leader of this franchise, who's himself, with his few games that he managed, still was over 500, and that makes it 15 straight years, I think, that he has been a winning manager. 15 straight, 8 with the Tribe. That's Hall of Fame caliber leadership right there. I will end with this before I maybe dive into a couple quick stories and then Q&A. But people ask me, why is Terry so good? What makes him such a remarkable leader? And there's 3 things that I always speak to. The first one is he's authentic. Anybody in a position of leadership tries to be somebody they are not. The people that work for you, connect with you, they'll read through that in a heartbeat. Be genuine, be authentic. And Tito is absolutely that. He's the most authentic guy. If you ever saw one of his press conferences, you know how authentic and genuine Tito is. He embraces individuality. You know, in sports, there used to be a thing where everybody had to walk in a line. Everybody was a clone. If you didn't do it my way, you're gone. Tito is not like that. Tito absolutely embraces the individuality, the individual personality of every one of our guys. He understands it's not an easy road as a former #1 draft pick. You know, he came out of the University of Arizona as one of the top college baseball players. He won the World Series, was MVP for the University of Arizona Wildcats when he was a player, was a #1 draft pick of the Montreal Expos. About 6 knee surgeries later, his career wasn't as quite as what he had expected. So he knows how difficult it is to get to be a Major League Baseball player. And a lot of that has to do with the individual personality of each guy. So he embraces that. Now, they all have to understand they're there to respect the game, to be professional, to be a good teammate, and all the things that respect and professionalism speak to. But as far as how they dress and the music and just the way they go about getting to that point of singular nature of purpose, he's okay with all that. And he embraces that. And I think our players respond to that tremendously. Lastly, it's service to others. A lot of people want to be the leader for a lot of different reasons. And maybe it's because your leader will make more money, that you can blame other people if things go wrong or whatever it is. But deep down, leadership, I believe, and I think Tito expresses this, it's all about service to others when you're in a leadership position. That the guys in our clubhouse and his coaches and the clubhouse kids and the security guy outside the door, everybody, he's there for them to make sure that they can be the best they can be. And so being authentic and embracing individuality and service to others is the traits that Tito brings to the table, which is why we've been a very successful franchise ever since he stepped foot in our ballpark. Before we dive in to questions, up above me is this photo. I'm just going to touch on that one. People ask me, I've done this now for 42 years. Is there one moment that speaks to you more than any other moment in the 42 years? This was July 21st, 2001. This is where in 2001, we celebrated our 100th anniversary as, again, a charter member of the American League. So part of the ceremonies during that season is we created a top 100 Indians roster. And of all the players who were on that top 100, we had about 45 that came to Cleveland on this Saturday afternoon for a big weekend celebration. And we did a team picture right behind second base, right before the game started, so that the fans would fill the ballpark and our players would be able to have 35,000, 40,000 fans saluting them. And Charlie Nagy is the starting pitcher that day. And so I went up to him. He was one of the rare guys that you could go up to on the day that he was pitching and actually talk to. Most starting pitchers get the blinders on. You don't go near them. You don't talk to them. It's just stay away. Charlie was more of an outgoing guy, and you could chat with him on game day. Not a lot, but you would go up to him. So I go up to him and I say, look, I am not going to have this team photo because he was a member of the top 100 roster, of course. He's in the Indians Hall of Fame. I said, I'm not going to get this picture taken without you. So I'm going to wait to the very last moment. I'm going to put a stepladder at the back end of the riser, the back row riser. When you're done with your bullpen session to get ready to start the game, you come walking over. We'll take your warm-up jacket, your glove, stand up on the, get on the stepladder, stand up on the top row. We'll take the picture. You can get on to do your business and go win a ball game for us tonight. And he was very appreciative. I didn't want him to be that kid in the elementary school homeroom picture where there was a little thumbnail in the corner saying absent that day. I did not want that to be Charlie Nagy, because Charlie, Carlos, Sandy Alomar were the three guys who never said no to me when we were going from Cleveland Stadium to Jacobs Field at that time, doing all the promotion for us, dealing with any event that we had. Those three never said no. And so I wasn't going to have this picture done without Charlie in it. So he comes, does it, stands there. We're done. Now all of a sudden, Bob Feller, Mel Harder, Louis Tiant, Sam McDowell, Gaylord Perry, Jim Perry, all the pitchers, Gary Bell, Early Wynn. No, Early wasn't there. Just all the great pitchers in Indians history who were part of the 45 guys who came that day, all go up to him and start hugging him, shaking his hand, and said, we've heard so much about you. I can't wait to see you pitch today. And he looked to me as we were finally getting the guys, as you see them walking off the field here, and Charlie's going over to our dugout, and he looks at me and he goes, I better not suck today. Now I'm nervous. It was just awesome, because just the way those old time pitchers connected with one of their own who was a current pitcher, that's what baseball is all about. So with that, I think we are supposed to go into the raise your hand section. If anybody has a question, is that right? Is that the format we're in? And as we're finding that, I'll tell one more crazy story. One of my favorites is, there's a lot of you out in the audience who might have played baseball in your lives. and you sit at our ballpark or watch on TV and you say, I could hit that guy. How come that guy let that pitch go right by? How could he not swing and hit that ball? That ball is right down the middle. And I can tell you from personal experience, don't ever think that again. Back in the early 80s, during my first few years with the Indians, I played college baseball at Division III, Ohio Wesleyan. Played a year of basketball there, played a few years of baseball. So I thought I could play. So we're in Tucson, Arizona for spring training. Mike Seggy, our traveling secretary, who actually has been with the team for 45 years. He's the elder statesman. I'm number 2. And we'd hit ground balls to each other and get a clubhouse kid to play first base and take a few swings we'd throw to each other. And one day, Lenny Barker, who had just won 19 games and led the league in strikeouts, comes back in from having a late afternoon run because he had a weight clause in his contract. And so he would go home after workouts, get a nap, come back, do a little bit extra work to meet that weight clause for his contract. So he's looking at us and he's, saying certain things to us about how we're no good. What do we think we're doing out on a baseball field? And Mike and I start saying, well, we could hit you, you're not that good. And he challenges us. And he says, all right, guys. And this happened to be on a Friday back in the day, early 80s, when you were paid by check. No such thing as direct deposit. You're paid by check. And he goes, go get your paychecks, boys. I'll bet my paycheck to your paychecks. I'll throw 10 pitches. You will not be able to put a ball in fair territory. I don't care if it dribbles to second base. We're not talking hits. Just put a ball within the first and third baselines. No bunting allowed. And Mike and I look at each other and go, we could at least put a bat on the ball, and we got to do this. We're idiots. We think we could do this. So you stand up there in the batter's box. I was a left-handed hitter. First pitch is right by you. You're like, oh, I don't think this was a very good idea. So 10 pitches go by. I swing and miss on the curveballs, the fastballs. I don't even connect on one. Mike dribbled one down the third base line that ended up going foul, and that was the only one he hit. So we're done. He walks off the mound, grabs our paychecks, and walks into the locker room, into the clubhouse. And we look at each other, and first thing we're thinking is, how in the world are we going to tell our wives we just lost our paycheck because we thought we could hit Lenny Barker? So when you're back watching the games and you think you could do that, take it from me, you can't. Back to you, Frank.
Thank you, Bob. It was great reminiscing on some great stories, and I like to tell everyone we need to support the Cleveland Indians. It's a great asset to our community. We don't realize with all the bigger cities that don't have sports franchises, we're blessed to have the Cleveland Indians, Cleveland Cavaliers, and the Cleveland Browns. So please go out and support the team. Thank you, Bob, for such great stories. And if there's any other questions, please use the chat. Maybe we can get a question to Bob and all that. I always wanted to ask, are they ever going to get rid of home plate umpires and use technology to frame balls and strikes?
I think, that's a good question, Frank. I think that's going to happen. I think that is absolutely, the technology is in place. They've worked on it in the minor leagues. It's funny. There was discussion that this won't happen, but people are wondering, okay, if you do use technology in the game of baseball, we already do the replay system, et cetera, and we're going to do it with balls and strikes. Do you change the game enough where you take, because it's an electronic strike zone, do you change the strike zone during an at-bat? That early in the count,
Mm-hmm.
It's a tiny square for a strike zone, forcing the pitcher to have to throw into a tiny zone to get more swings, to get more action. Because right now, the game of baseball, there's more strikeouts than there are hits in the game of baseball. And all we do is hit home runs. I think it's still every team who has won has hit more home runs than the other guy. And you go, well, yeah, you hit more home runs, you score more runs. That's not always the case. You hit a bunch of solo homers, and a team will get men on base and hit a 3-run homer, and they didn't get as many homers as you, but they scored more runs. As the at-bat goes, the strike zone gets larger.
Well, that's an interesting twist.
It's a bizarre. I don't think that's going to happen in our game, but I do think that you're going to get a scenario down the road where there is an electronic strike zone that beeps in the umpire's headset. And
yeah, I would just like a fair strike zone where they call it from the letters to the knees. Because I remember back when we were playing the Atlanta Braves, and we were complaining about how wide the strike zone was for the Atlanta Braves pitchers. It was very obvious on TV, and that was going back, 15, 20 years.
25 years ago, we still, well, it was 1995. Not that we remember these things or lose sleep over it, but Joe Brinkman was the umpire.
Okay, I remember him.
He was standing on one knee. He couldn't see over the catcher's head. We never saw our guys so angry. Eddie Murray almost got thrown out in the first inning of a World Series, Game 6 of the World Series, because he went nose to nose with Brinkman on how horrible his setup was. I mean, this is the first thing, just how horrible his setup was behind home plate.
Right.
So,
wow. Well, that's interesting stuff. Well, one last question. You think, players are shooting more for the long ball and getting away from bunting real well? Like, you see the art of bunting, like teams in general just are horrific at bunting and moving runners over, or playing small ball and getting guys on base so you can have guys hit doubles and triples, or even I'd be happy with a double.
Yeah. Well, the way the game is played today, like it or not, it's just the way the analytics work in our game today, that you, even with 2 strikes, you swing for the fences. You've given an all-out effort. There's the philosophy that if you did bunt, you're only playing for 1 run, and you could end up scoring 4 or 5 runs in an inning. Why give you an out when you only get 27 precious outs? I will tell you, though, the base running in this postseason has probably been the worst collective base running fundamentals in the history of our sport. Guys there's only a few that truly do bunt. As a matter of fact, our team, Tito, uses the bunt more than anybody. I think we led the league in sacrifice hits for a couple years in a row. That's part of Tito's game a little bit. But it's a game of long ball, swinging, missing a lot, pitchers spinning the ball to miss bats. While it's been entertaining, it's still something us older generation that are used to, guys like Rod Carew and Tony Gwynn and them, who could slap the ball everywhere,
right,
and be 330 hitters.
Oh, yeah, the fundamentals, you're right, because I remember when I played high school ball, our coach drilled in, if we missed a cutoff man, we got in big trouble. And it seems like in baseball today, guys are routinely missing cutoffs or not throwing to the right base. Runners are advancing. So do you think team defense in general in the league has just gotten worse? And why aren't they teaching these fundamentals in the minor league system? Because I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, they do. They teach it every day. Kids get thrown into the big leagues because of their bat.
Okay.
Prior to being ready completely as a complete ball player. But their bat is so important and so above average that you can live with teaching him at the big leagues some of the things he should have been taught at the minor leagues. Why this year base running was so horrible, I don't know. But you ask anybody, Tim Kirchin of ESPN, you ask anybody who's watched our ball games, not just the whole Major League Baseball, just sad the way the base running fundamentals have been played out in 2020. Let's just hope we can go back to normalcy, have a Goodyear, Arizona spring training where our fans can come out and connect with us once again. We miss our fans so terribly, and we just keep our fingers crossed that we're going to be able to be back to a little bit of normalcy and have a full season of Indians baseball. We all need it for sure.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to coming down eventually and having a beer at the stadium with a hot dog. I missed that.
Yes, sir. Well, thanks for having me today,
you.
Frank, and good luck to everybody, and go Tribe.
Yep, go Tribe. Thank you. Well, with that, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Jacob Drossner from ClearBridge Investments. He is a portfolio specialist providing capital market and economic analysis, as well as portfolio construction and fundamental equities research, and give his insights to the audience in ranging from broker-dealers, financial advisors, institutional clients, and investment consultants. Please welcome Jacob Drossner.
Thank you, Frank. I appreciate the warm welcome, and thank you everyone on the line for having me today. If I could just share my presentation, we can go ahead and get started with the ClearBridge anatomy of a recession. So what this presentation was designed to do is to deliver some important insights. And we're trying to make everyone better investors and also better asset allocators through volatility. And it's been incredibly successful. The Anatomy of a Recession program, we have over 25,000 people that are subscribed to receive updates to this. And it's a very timely and informative way to keep our eyes on the long-term prize. When reactions start to get the best of us, this helps center me to recognize potential buying opportunities instead of reasons to be fearful. Now, during a market cycle, there are several times when it feels like this time is different. And it's usually when the market's going down that people feel that way. And when we're going through these downturns, it feels like a panic attack. Now, if you're unlucky enough to be familiar with what a panic attack is, you know that it comes out of nowhere. And right at that maximum point of discomfort, when you just can't take it anymore, the panic attack, it goes away just as quickly as it came on. And there's an important parallel here to investing. When the average investor is going through one of these panic attacks, right at that maximum point of discomfort, right, whether it was during the COVID-19 sell-off or the trade war escalation that we saw last year, right at that maximum point of discomfort, when they just can't take it anymore, they end up selling out of the market. Of course, the market then recovers, and when the investor feels good about things again, they rinse, wash, and repeat the process all over again. And the result of this is clear. If we're looking at the 20-year annualized returns of every asset class. And you can see that the average investor fared the worst. They only garnered 2.9% annualized return over that time frame. So the average investor barely beat inflation. Now let's think about that for a second. Over the biggest bull market in US history, for both stocks and bonds, the average investor barely has more purchasing power today than they did when we started this epic run over 20 years ago. And now, unfortunately for investors, we saw the mother of all panic attacks, and that was during the COVID-19 sell-off. And what we're looking at here is every bear market since 1928. And it shows us just how unique that COVID-19 sell-off and the bounce back have been. So that blue shaded area, that's what you would expect from a drawdown. It's the 80th through 20th percentile range of every bear market. And you can see that we were pretty much in that white territory the entire time for not only the sell-off, but also the bounce back. So that's not how you traditionally see a market crash or a recession. They usually take a little bit longer to play out. I think when all is said and done, this recession is going to only have lasted 4 months. And to put that into perspective, the average length of a recession has been 13 months. So why was this time different? And we think the rebound happened so quickly this time around because the Fed and Congress, they stepped in aggressively. And what we're looking at on this slide is QE purchases by our central bank over the course of 2020. And you can see that the Fed's balance sheet, it increased from $4 trillion at the end of February to over $7 trillion today. So that's a $3 trillion injection of liquidity over the course of only 3.5 months. That's a massive amount of bond buying. If you look at the next largest QE program, it was QE3 during the Great Financial Crisis. And the Fed was buying $85 billion worth of bonds per month for a total of just over $1 trillion. This time around, the Fed did 3 times the amount of QE in 1/4 of the time. $3 trillion over the course of 3.5 months is an extremely large amount of monetary stimulus. All of that liquidity made its way into financial markets, which is what created that V-shaped bottom that we saw in the market at the end of March. But it wasn't just the Fed. Congress also stepped in aggressively, and that was with fiscal stimulus. And we looked at the COVID-19 packages versus the dot-com bubble, as well as the Great Financial Crisis. And not only was this package bigger, it was also more front-loaded. So Congress very quickly gave $3 trillion of stimulus to the U.S. economy. And the combination of this with the Fed's actions that we just talked about, it short-circuited the normal recessionary experience. And when you go through a recessionary drawdown, what you see there on the right, you usually see a lot of false starts or pockets of strength that feel like the bottom of the market. And then you just see it roll over as well as the economy continues to deteriorate. And you've had a lot of these fake out that they get investors to buy into them. And by the end of the recession, if you've been faked out 1, 2, or 3 times by what we call these counter trend rallies, you end up under allocated to equities or out of the market altogether. And you can see that these counter trend rallies, they've gotten bigger over the years. And on the right-hand side, you can see that during the Great Financial Crisis, there were 8 notable counter trend rallies. And I want to highlight 2 of them on that chart. So that I want to highlight that 51-day counter trend rally that we had during the second quarter of 2008. So they can be very long as far as time is concerned, but they can also be quite strong as far as magnitude is concerned. So that last one, it went up 24%. And that was between November of 2008 and January of 2009. But when the economy continued to deteriorate, the markets, they rolled over and they eventually hit those March 2009 lows. And because of the prevalence of these counter trend rallies or these dead cat bounces or head fakes, we created the ClearBridge recovery dashboard. And this recovery dashboard is a group of 9 variables that have done a very good job of foreshadowing a durable economic and market bottom. It's essentially a reverse stoplight analogy. So we'd like to see these indicators go from a recessionary red to a yellow improvement to a green expansion. And on the left-hand side, you can see the 3 fault lines of the economy. We want to see broad-based confidence amongst businesses, consumers, and investors. We want to see economic green shoots. We want to see strength from housing starts, initial jobless claims. We want to see those come down. And we want to see strength from the Philly Fed. And then last but not least, we want to see those financial stresses begin to moderate. We want to see credit spreads come down. We also want to see accommodative Fed policy and a broad loosening of financial conditions. But most importantly, the dashboard overall has been green since June. And what that signals to us, that green economic expansion, is that we have seen a durable economic and market bottom. And what we've been advocating to clients since it turned green in June was to take risks. The worst is over, and to take advantage of the next expansion. And over the course of the third quarter, we've seen broad-based strength in all of the underlying indicators. We're not going to have the rocket ship that we have had off the bottom, but we're also not going to have a double dip recession. And the recovery, it has taken hold. But it's going to be in a different shape than we expected. So what we did expect was almost like a backwards J. And a lot of letters were thrown out there at the beginning of this recession and recovery. But the economic strength, we thought it would start to peter out as we got into the fall. But based on what we know now, it does appear that we are having a full-fledged V-shaped recovery. And this is clearly exemplified if you look at retail sales. It took us 6 months to regain former peaks of retail sales from the height of the crisis. To put that into perspective, it took 16 months after the dot-com bubble, and it took 34 months during the great financial crisis for retail sales to recover. So these sales numbers, they bounced back extremely quickly. And a key driver of that was because of stimulus, everything we've just talked about. And it's not unheard of for people to make more money over the course of a recession. We've seen it before. We saw it in 1970. We saw it in 1981. We even saw it in 2001. But people usually make less money over the course of a recession. But this time around, people made much more money, and that's because of stimulus. And we're looking at disposable income per capita, and we're looking at that on an annualized basis during a recession. People made 34.2% more money during the COVID-19 crisis. So remember, everyone received their $1,200 stimulus checks. There was an additional federal benefit of $600 that came on top of state benefits. We had the PPP program that gave small businesses grants and loans, kept them afloat. But there's a concern right now that we're hitting a fiscal cliff. And that's because we haven't yet received stimulus in August nor September. And we're probably not going to see stimulus before the election. But let's remember, that's only 2 weeks away now. And we think these fears of a double dip recession are overblown. Even though federal benefits ended on the 1st of August, the August retail sales numbers, they came in at a positive 0.6%. So while that is a deceleration, it's still a very strong positive number. And all these things considered, this is a slower but still a very healthy expansion. And you can also get some forward-looking data points on this, like credit card data. And that shows us that consumer spending, it's continuing to grind higher. And the other reason we're not concerned is because think about some of the newer programs that we've heard about, the Lost Wage Assistance Program. And we launched that by tapping into FEMA's funds for $44 billion. And it was essentially, this program was designed to give people that are still unemployed an additional $300 per week. And that's to help them and their spending habits. So the first checks, they were sent out in the middle of September, but they were actually backdated all the way to August 1st. So anyone who was unemployed during that time frame, they received a lump sum of $1,800. And they've gotten another couple of checks through the end of September and the beginning of October. So this is enough to keep those unemployed people spending. And that's at least until the end of the fourth quarter when we can get another stimulus package. And if we think about this from a different perspective, the personal savings rate, it's 14.1%. And that's only down 3.5% from where we were last month. So people have been saving for a rainy day here, and that's pent up demand for consumer spending as well. And the last thing that I want to touch on as far as incomes are concerned is the labor market. And the labor market, it's healed much quicker than what was anticipated. So that unemployment rate, it's fallen from 14.7% all the way down to 7.9% over the course of only 5 months. And that's a drop of 6.8%, and we've recovered 52% of the jobs that were lost during the crisis. Now, again, to put everything into perspective, during the great financial crisis, it took 3.5 years for us to regain half of those jobs lost. It took an entire decade for the unemployment rate to drop 6%. And we've done this over the course of 5 months this time around. So this looks, smells, and feels like that V-shaped recovery. And I think maybe the best illustration that we can find of that V-shaped recovery is the City Economic Surprise Index. And that's better known as the CESI. And this is a very broad-based measurement of whether economic data on balance is either beating or missing consensus expectations. And this index, it made record highs. And it was almost threefold of the previous high. And that's as the economy started to reopen in the US. So the economic data, it's consistently coming well ahead of expectations. The move that we saw off the lows, it was because of that monetary and fiscal stimulus. But that second leg higher that we saw during the summer, that was a result of a better, stronger economy. But it was also because of stronger earnings. So consensus expectations for earnings during the second quarter were negative 45%. They came in at negative 32%. That was the biggest beat that we've seen since at least the last crisis. And we saw earnings revisions turn positive and upwards revisions for 2020, 2021, and beyond. So if we're looking at how much these companies are earning and we're wondering which one was going to close the gap, how are we going to close the gap between the market and the economy? And believe it or not, it was the economy and better earnings that have closed that differential between the two. But let's talk about some of the flies in the ointment. I've been a little bit too optimistic this far. So the most recent jobless claims number, they came in at 840,000. So that was well below the peak of 6.9 million, but that's still 150,000 more than the previous weekly jobless claims number that we saw in 1982. So we're still at record highs in terms of jobless claims. But while the economy is starting to come back online quickly, there are still some pockets of weakness, and this is one of them. The other issue is that winter is coming. I hope all of you Game of Thrones fans are smiling here, but this is a concern there is a concern out there that as the Northern Hemisphere gets colder into the winter, there could be a much more damaging outbreak of the virus. And we've seen lockdowns elsewhere in the world, places like the UK. We've seen lockdowns in Paris. Israel is another example. And the concern is that we could have another lockdown here in the US. But the reason we at ClearBridge are not as concerned as those people out there is because when the US cases flared over the summer, the mortality rate actually remained low. And that was due to not only better treatment protocols that we have in hospitals, but a higher concentration of cases in younger individuals. So those that weren't as at risk. And also the hospital systems in the US, they remain far less burdened than they were in March. So we're definitely not foreseeing lockdowns being an issue in the US even as we continue through the winter. But another potential risk that I need to address is solvency. And if you have a business that relies on face-to-face interactions, think about a restaurant, a bar, a hair salon. If revenues at those places that are very in-person, face-to-face, if they're still at 50 to 75% of where they were pre-COVID, even though they've seen or been given some life support from all the stimulus we've talked about, some of these businesses aren't going to be able to survive in perpetuity on those levels. So until we get back to normal, we could see an increased rate of bankruptcies amongst these types of businesses, which could hurt the overall unemployment rate and the economy. And that, of course, it would spark market volatility. But we think we're going into higher volatility in the market regardless, just based on where we are in the election cycle. So during presidential election years, we typically see volatility ratchet up dramatically during October and November. And that's not uncommon because investors, they tend to shift their portfolios in anticipation of future policies from what could be a new administration. And on top of that, we have the potential for that fiscal cliff I talked about. So an economic growth scare would shake out investors, and certainly a second wave of the virus would spark volatility in the market. But the Fed also hasn't provided any concrete actions on how they're going to achieve their inflation targets. So right now they have an inflation bogey of 2%. And because of all of these dynamics and that lack of clarity, the markets could be choppy over the next few months. But it's our view that over the long term, these short-term short-term volatility, that's an opportunity to buy the dip or to dollar cost average into the market to participate in the next expansion. It's not if you see volatility, it's not the end of the expansion. It's just a correction in a very healthy bull market. And the reason that we say that is because strength, it typically begets more strength. And if you look at the strongest 50-day trading rallies that we have in history, the rally off the lows in March, that was the strongest that we've seen since the 1970s. But what I really want to show on this slide is that even 3 and 6 and 12 months after that 50-day rally, the market is typically positive. So if you look at 12 months after that 50-day rally, the markets are up 100% of the time, and they're up on average 17.2%. And the market isn't up 17.2% since the 50-day rally following March 23rd. So that would suggest alone that we have more upside from here. And the Fed also has our back. I mean, they have a lot of ammunition that they can use. If you look at all of the emergency lending facilities that the Fed has in its arsenal, they've used we approximate maybe $125 billion, but that's out of $4.1 trillion of potential support. If the economy has a hiccup, the Fed's going to be there to backstop it. And the Fed also has the ability to do more quantitative easing. The Fed's balance sheet would be at $10 trillion if they did as much stimulus as they had in Europe. Or it would be at $21 trillion if they did as much stimulus as they did in Japan. So the Fed's balance sheet, it's at $7 trillion today. So that's only 43% of GDP. And if you compare that to Europe at 64% and Japan at 131%, we think that the Fed has a lot of room to run. And right now, the Fed is doing another $120 billion of quantitative easing per month. And we think that amount of monetary stimulus could actually ratchet up if we don't see some fiscal stimulus out of Congress over the coming months. So any delay because of the election, we think the Fed will be there to fill that gap. And the Fed, they certainly have that ability to press on the accelerator through a potential downturn. And the Fed, they also changed their inflation framework. So what it used to be is they would consistently try to hit that 2% inflation target. But if you're just trying to hit it, that naturally makes inflation lower because you're not trying to overshoot it or have it be above 2% for a sustained period of time. So the Fed, it's only hit its 2% inflation target 3 times since 2008. And inflation was only at 2% or higher for less than a year in total over that time frame. So the Fed, they're trying to make up for this by using an average inflation targeting regime. So in order to raise rates, they have to see 3 criteria. They want to see maximum unemployment in the U.S. Maximum employment in the U.S. They want to hit that 2% inflation target, and they want to exceed that target for a period of time. So the Fed's dot plots are what they use as their quantitative measures for the moves that they make. They have unemployment at 4% and inflation at 2% by the end of 2023. So we're looking pretty far out, but that's not that far. 2023 is not that far away, maybe a little over 2 years. But Chairman Powell, who heads up the Fed, he said that he wants to get unemployment back to pre-COVID levels. So that was 3.5%. But if the dot plot has the unemployment at 4% by the end of 2023, and Chairman Powell wants to get unemployment actually down to 3.5% or lower, that means that we're not going to see that first rate hike that everyone's so scared about until 2025 at the earliest. And the Fed, they clearly have our back here. They're going to be accommodative. They're not going to get in the way. And if you think about the last cycle, the Fed made a huge policy mistake by raising rates in December of 2015. So core PCE, and that's their preferred measure for inflation, that was 1.2%. We're thinking back to 2015. But because unemployment was at 5% their dot plots or their models, it told them that inflation was coming, and it never came. And they've abandoned this previous regime, and they're going to wait for inflation to exceed that 2% target before they even consider raising rates. And this backdrop is what's going to allow the economy to run hot, and it's very good for asset prices overall. But the real game changer for the next year is we're probably going to have several vaccines that make it through to commercialization. You're going to have these vaccines get through their phase 3 trials and make it to market. And the reason we think that is because we're looking at the success rate for clinical trials. And this is specific to infectious disease vaccines. And we're looking at that from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3. And if you look at phase 3, 85% of candidates move through to commercialization. And right now we have 9 COVID-19 candidates. So we wouldn't be surprised to see multiple vaccines on the market next year. And these vaccines would go a very long way in building up both consumer and business confidence. And if confidence is high, we're going to see those spending habits return to normal. A return to normalcy, what it's going to cause long term is we think we're going to have a situation of revenge spending. And that's going to be what's going to propel the economic growth and the market higher over the long-term averages. So the savings rate, it was all the way up at 33.6% earlier in the cycle, but it's still a very, very strong 14.1% today. That's a percentage of income that consumers are saving. And we also have inventories that are at record lows. So if we think back to the beginning of the pandemic, businesses were cutting costs. They needed to preserve capital. A lot of those global supply chains, they were broken in the process. But today we have a situation where the sales to inventory levels in the US are at the lowest level since 2014. And that inventory restocking cycle on the other side, that can be very powerful for the US economy. And if you put all that together, we think the economy is going to grow above consensus expectations next year. And looking at it from a market perspective, there's a lot of dry powder on the sidelines. You know it from clients. Investors' cash holdings are at 16%. There are a lot of investors who really haven't participated in the move higher this far. And a little bit of FOMO, or fear of missing out, it can drive the markets higher in the near term. But we would say don't worry if you missed out on that initial thrust higher. And we're looking at the returns from the beginning of an economic expansion to the next recession. So let's remember that the beginning of the economic expansion is not the market bottom. So the economic expansion this time around actually began on July 1st. So for the rest of that expansion, the market would be up another 96% on average. But if you're in a secular bull market, which is one of our core views, that we are in that secular bull, the return during that expansion jumps all the way up to almost 150%. And we do think that we're in the midst of a secular bull market. And that's because of this chart right here. So believe it or not, over the last 90 years, the market has consistently gone through 10 to 20-year periods where returns effectively go nowhere. And that's better known as a secular bear market. But those are always followed by a 20-year period where the markets have outsized returns. And those are known as secular bull markets. So let's go all the way to the left. You can see that we had a nasty secular bear in the 30s and 40s. Your cumulative return was negative 22%. But that gave rise to the secular bull of the 50s and 60s. Your return jumped all the way up to 450%. Then we had the secular bull. Then we had the secular bear of the 70s. Remember, high inflation, but the return was roughly flat. More importantly, it gave rise to the secular bull of the 80s and 90s, where returns jumped up to over 1,250%. So it's our perspective at ClearBridge that we exited the secular bear of the 2000s, and we're now in year 10 of that 20-year period where you're going to have outsized equity returns. So that doesn't mean that you're not going to have bumps in the road, things like market crashes, recessions, pandemics. But if this pattern over the last 90 years holds true, we're going to have a lot more all-time highs as we move into the new decade. And we shouldn't be scared of all-time highs. 1 year following an all-time high, stocks, they've historically been up 8.5%, and they've been in positive territory 72% of the time. So we think the U.S. economy could actually surprise to the upside next year. We could see some choppiness in the market through the election, but there's also potential upside as well. In a lower for longer interest rate world, which is where we stand today, we think that within equities, dividend paying stocks are going to be attractive. Think about all of the areas where you can't get yield, bringing larger swaths of investors into dividend paying equities. I want to remind everyone of the comments that I started with, which is that the Fed and Congress, they stepped in together. And that was a very powerful force in supporting asset prices. So our overall view is that we've put in that durable low for both the market and the economy. And that's why we turn that recovery dashboard green overall. And so since everyone on this call can agree that it's impossible to time the market precisely, we continue to advocate to our clients to stay invested and to look to volatility to actually re-risk portfolios to participate in the power of this economic expansion. So thank you again for joining in for the ClearBridge Anatomy of a Recession. I do want to open up for any questions you may have. Please, just as a friendly reminder, use the raised hand feature so we can bring you to the screen, or sorry, to the stage, or I'm happy to answer any questions that appear on the screen as well.
A question for you. Has this going to be recorded, or has it been recorded, this presentation?
I don't
Oh,
know,
okay.
but I will follow up with you when I hear one way or another. And if not, I'm more than happy to share the presentation materials with you, so you at least have the deck at your hands.
Well, just to comment on your presentation, I think that from my perspective, your presentation shocked me in its positivity. I know you pointed out the negatives, but my goodness, if you I mean, I want to listen to it again. that's why I was hoping it was recorded. Thank you.
No problem, and thank you. I think it comes down for us at ClearBridge. We're looking at this lower for longer interest rate environment, and you can get a lot of growth out of equities at a reasonable price. And we don't see that first rate hike until at least 2025. We think that if we look at the one common denominator in every valuation equation, so when looking at the price of stocks, it's interest rates. And if that stays lower for longer, the valuations can go higher. We're very bullish as equity investors today.
Thank you.
Please, if anyone has any questions, just use the raise hand function on the screen.
Hey,
Hi,
Jacob,
Frank.
how you doing?
I'm doing well,
Good.
thanks.
Yeah, I do have a question. I know I mentioned earlier that I know in general the markets, once there's clarity, it doesn't really care who's in the Oval Office, but there's been a lot of concern and questions regarding the tax changes, especially at the corporate level, which would end up hitting the bottom line of many companies. I wondered what you and ClearBridge are thinking about if there's a Biden win and he's successful at getting his tax policies implemented, that possible impact, to the markets.
Absolutely. And thank you for the question, Frank. I wanted to get back to the secular bulls because I think the bottom line is that they've happened under administrations of both parties. So the one we were looking at, the secular bull, actually that we're in today, it started under the Obama administration and it's continued under the Trump administration. And if we look back further than that, I'll actually bring the slide back up here so that we can all see the years that I'm talking about.
It's great when technology works.
Yeah, isn't it? This is the coolest conferencing feature that I've ever used. I'm very impressed with the systems you have in
Thanks.
place. But I want to point out that 1980 to 2000 secular bull as well. So let's think about it. That includes Reagan, who was a Republican president, Bush, who was a Republican president, and Clinton, who was a Democratic president. And that same holds true actually even further back. If we look at Eisenhower, Kennedy, and LBJ. So Eisenhower, Republican, Kennedy, Democrat, LBJ, Democrat. So it isn't just about the president. It's also about what happens in Congress and what the margins are. And that's because that is what ultimately determines what can and cannot be passed. So I also want to give the breakdown of market returns based on political outcomes. And I use the data set that I use is actually looking back all the way since World War II. And I think this is really interesting. And I'll give you all of the data points, but I'll highlight the ones that are actually possible at this point this time around. So if you have a unified government that is democratic, on average, the market is up 9.8%. And if you have a unified government that's Republican, the market historically has been up an average of 13%. Now let's talk about that from a different perspective. Let's talk about a unified Congress. So the White House is different from Congress, but one party controls both the House and Senate. So if you have a Democratic president with a Republican Congress, the market's returns have been on average 13%. But that's not possible right now. What is possible is a Republican president and a Democratic Congress. And on average, the market's been up 5%. But I have two more possibilities, which is a split Congress. So where you have the White House in one chamber or one party, but the other party controls the other chamber. If you have a Democratic president, if Joe Biden is elected, historically, that would suggest the market would be up 13.6%. And if you have a Republican president, if President Trump is elected and we have a split Congress, on average, historically, the market's been up 9%. And the average return over all these periods combined is a positive 9.2%. So the market has always been up regardless of election outcomes. And so the Democrats taking the Senate, but Trump winning, it would historically have been the worst. Whereas it would seem to be a Biden win, but Republicans hold the Senate. That would historically be the best for markets. But all this is historical perspective. The future could certainly be different. But history, what it really suggests to us is it matters what happens beyond just the White House.
Correct.
And stocks, most importantly, they've done well under both Democratic and Republican presidents, depending on how Congress shakes out. So the other part of your question was about corporate tax rates. And right now, they have the potential to go from 21% today up to possibly 28% has been proposed. And this would be tough for certain companies that have grown earnings over the last 4 years on the backs of corporate tax reform. But to put that into perspective, the tax rate was 36% before it went all the way down to 21%. So this, while it is a material move higher, within that context, they're actually still not paying as much in taxes as they were just 4 years ago. And there have been some outsized beneficiaries to those that I'll talk about. Certainly, within that software stack, within the technology space, those are the biggest beneficiaries of corporate tax reform. And those are some of the most expensive stocks in the market right now. I think ClearBridge, as an active manager, has been structurally underweight that momentum group and is actually positioning our portfolios for a more value-oriented or cyclical environment as we start to see those improvements off the bottom, economically speaking.
Well, thanks for the clarity on that.
Frank, do you have another question, or do we see any raised hands? All right. Well, if there aren't any more questions, I want to thank you again for having me today and for tuning in for the ClearBridge Anatomy of a Recession. I'm happy to share these materials with anyone who would like. And we also have that subscription feature that I mentioned at the beginning. So if you're interested in receiving automatic updates to this program, as you've seen changes in that dashboard or new slides altogether, we can get you signed up by email if that's something you're interested in.
Well, thank you very much. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Jacob. And I'd really like to thank Bob DiBiasio and Jake Drossner for their presentations today. I hope everyone got a lot of great information on our local tribe team, as well as what's happening in the markets and where we think they're heading. So ClearBridge, I think, provided some great insights that I hope people can take to heart. And in regards to the stuff that you read in the press, I think this is a very objective look at factually what's happened historically. And while historically is not a guarantee what's going to happen in the future, it is a good predicator of what we think will happen going forward. Again, I want to thank our sponsors, New York Life Investments, MFS Investments, and ClearBridge Investments. Really appreciate that. That allowed us to use the great technology that we did today to put together a virtual meeting that I'm very proud of. I want to thank Michelle on our team for organizing this and the rest of the team at Plan Financial Services. I do want to let all the attendees know that, for the next period of time, up until really 2:15, we can network and hang out and talk to one another. So you don't have to exit the event unless you have someplace to go. But I do want to thank all the attendees for joining and felt that you got some value out of this. And we welcome any feedback. We do plan on having our next event live, but we are also contemplating using this technology in regards to doing other events that we can push out great content and information on timely topics. So your feedback will be very welcome. I appreciate that. So with that, I want to thank everyone for attending. Hopefully everyone sticks around a little bit and so we can talk. And I want to wish everyone a safe upcoming holiday and a happy holiday with your families. I know we're going to have some challenges, but I think I said, let's be positive. We're in this together, and we're going to be better for it once we come out on the other end. So thank you very much.